Gopijana Palapa Giriparatari Yasodanandana Pratajanaranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jayaradha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Palapa Giriparatari Yasodanandana Pratajanaranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jayaradha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Palapa Girivaratari Yasodanandana Pratajanaranjana Yamunatira Panachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Bonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 54, and the texts are 32, 33, and 34. So 3 texts. So we'll chant text 32 together. Drishva pratrirvadhot yogam Rukmini papa vivala Patitva padayor partur Vachaka karunam sati Drishva pratriryadhot yogam Rukmini paya vivala Patitva padayor partur Vacha karunam sati Deshva pratrirvadho yogam Rukmini paya vivalam Patitva padayor partur Vacha karunam sati Deshva pratrirvadho yogam Rukmini paya vivalam Patitva padayor partur Vacha karunam sati. And the word for word, Drishtva, see, Ratri, her brother, Vadha, to kill, Udyogam, the attempt, Rukmini, Srimati Rukmini, Maya, by fear, Vivala, agitated, Patitva, falling, Padayo, at the feet, Vartu, of her husband, Uvacha, spoke, Karunam, pathetically, Sati, saintly. So the translation for text 32. Seeing Lord Krishna ready to kill her brother, saintly Rukmini was filled with alarm. She fell at her husband's feet and piteously spoke as follows. And text 33. Shri Rukmini Uvacha Yogeshvara Pametyatman Deva Deva Jagatpate Antum Narhasi Kalyana Vitaram Me Mahabhujam. And the translation for text 33. Shri Rukmini said, O controller of all mystic power, immeasurable one, Lord of lords, master of the universe, O all auspicious and mighty armed one, please do not kill my brother. And text 34. Shri Shuka Vacha Taya Pantasa Vikam Pitangayam Suchaya Sushyan Mukaruta Kantayam Katsarya Vishram Sita Hema Malayam Grita Pada Karuno Yavartata. And the translation for text 34. Sukadev Goswami said, Rukmini's sorry, the light is not so good here. Rukmini's utter fear caused her limbs to tremble and her mouth to dry up, while her throat choked up out of sorrow. And in her agitation, her golden necklace scattered. She grasped Krishna's feet, and the Lord, feeling compassionate, desisted. Purport, EBT purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti quotes the quote, worldly rule, unquote, that one's sister is the personification of mercy. Bagni, sorry, the light is really not good. I probably need the chandelier on, but anyway. Even though Rukmini was wicked even though Rukmi was wicked, was opposed to his sister's best interest, Rukmini was compassionate towards him, and the Lord shared her compassion. Omagyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shiyuta Parakamalam Shiyuto sorry. Vandeham Shri Guru Shiyuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhya Shakripa Sindhuvya Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Ramapadaswami Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare So 3 texts, one leading into the other. So the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur on text 32, which was seeing Lord Krishna ready to kill her brother, saintly Rukmini was filled with alarm. She fell at her husband's feet and piteously spoke as follows. So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in commenting on this text, he actually has a most interesting inner thought of Rukmini that he expresses. And it might be surprising in one sense. This is what Rukmini thought. What will people think if they know that my brother was killed before my eyes? And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur continues, this is his words, she was filled with fear because of this, not out of affection for her brother. And he continues, the prema of the queens of Dwarka, known as Samanjasa Prema, or to translate it, it's proper love, is dependent on public opinion, whereas the prema of the Braja Gopis, known as Samartha Prema, is much stronger because it is not dependent at all on the opinion of the public. So, close quote. So that was Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So there's a definition of prema, because this is the underlying emotion that's motivating Rukmini. So the definition of prema given by Srila Prabhupada is wanting to satisfy Krishna's senses. So a very simple definition. So of course it's exclusively satisfying Krishna's senses. So Samanjasa which was the kind of prema, or this qualification of the kind of desire that the queens of Dwarka have for wanting to satisfy Krishna's senses, is translated as wanting to satisfy the source of all. So wanting to satisfy the senses of the source of all. So going a little bit into this whole area, Srila Jiva Goswami, in his commentary in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, so not Srila Prabhupada's summary study, but the 2-volume Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami does the commentary on Srila Rupa Goswami's texts and comments. And by his commentary, there's a further understanding of that source of all. And that source of all, or Bhagavan, means one who's possessing knowledge, power, strength, lordship, influence, and beauty, without any bad qualities. So that's the source of all. So although there's the definition of Bhagavan with these 6 features, there are 2 general states of Bhagavan. So there's a Bhagavan which is a form of supreme majesty. And secondly, there's a form of supreme sweetness. So in the former, meaning in the form of supreme majesty, there's the ability to control by his powers. And one who realizes this type of Lord develops fear and respect for the Lord. And in contrast, the form of sweetness means producing pleasure through his form, his qualities, and his pastimes. And those who realize this form, they realize sweetness and come to attain that kind of love for the Lord, love for his form, his qualities, his pastimes. So if one realizes Brahman, so that's more the form of the Lord that has to do with majesty, that produces only bliss for the self, the spiritual self. So realization of sweetness covers up that realization as well as the realization of his powers. So that's a very interesting thing. So it's going further in one's realization because one's realizing the form of the Lord, that form of sweetness. So this is Srila Jiva Goswami doing that breakdown, the 2 categories of realization. And Srila Jiva Goswami writes that the realization of sweetness is a most excellent taste, or rasa, that's attained through a special type of prema that comes from, or it's produced from sadhana, which possesses such sweetness of emotions. So therefore, this covering of sweetness or awareness of the Lord's, should I say, power, so the realization of his power gets covered by the realization of his sweetness. And it's actually the highest type of knowledge. That's the explanation given by Srila Jiva Goswami. So there's a description from which one can infer this taste or rasa of sweetness that is operating. And it's going back a little bit. And I'm going to draw on, earlier on we heard how Balaram displayed this taste or this rasa of sweetness, or rather how he has that realization of Krishna in that rasa of sweetness, and we see how it's operating. So here's what we hear about Lord Balaram. When Lord Balaram heard about these preparations of the inimical kings and how Lord Krishna had set off alone to steal the bride, he feared that a fight would ensue, immersed in affection for his brother. He hurried to Kundina with a mighty army consisting of infantry and of soldiers, riding on elephants, horses, and chariots. So that was in the previous chapter, the 53rd chapter. And so you get some sense. He's not operating aware of Krishna's powers, because if he were, he could be relaxed. Oh, Krishna set off to steal the bride, but not at all. He's in that mood of sweetness. So remember, sweetness gets covered. The sweetness, meditating on the form of Krishna's qualities and pastimes, completely obliterates that awareness of his power. So Balaram is actually very concerned that Krishna has gone off to steal Rukmini all alone with his army. So he immediately puts together a whole big army, and out of affection, he hurries to Kundina himself. So that's been motivated by that sweetness, because that's how he sees Krishna. So completely oblivious to the powers of Krishna. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami, he states, lack of awareness of Krishna's powers, which causes sakarati, directed towards Krishna, is not created by ignorance. However, by the special rasa of heightened prema, this lack of awareness of his powers takes place. So notice, it's not coming out of ignorance, like, somehow persons who are experiencing that form of love of Krishna in his sweet form, or meditating on his sweetness, that they're somehow ignorant because they're not aware of his powers. Not at all. It's rather that it's actually coming from heightened prema. Just having this heightened prema of sweetness just obliterates that awareness of Krishna's powers. So it's just natural, it's how it happens. So in this particular circumstance, Srila Vishwanath, in his commentary, he's continuing this commentary of Rukmini. However, one should not think that this general characteristic of prema, namely exclusive possessiveness of Vishnu in a loving relationship, is lacking in Rukmini, since within herself she actually had no affection at all for Rukmi and other demons like him. So notice one may think that there's sisterly affection and anxiety because of sisterly affection, but not at all. She's operating on a completely different level. It's on a transcendental level of love for Krishna in this mood of sweetness, and she also, part of this heightened state of prema or love for Krishna, so not being conscious of the powers is one that I explained, although what we've seen is another aspect in Rukmini, and that is this kind of possessiveness that comes. And so that's something that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary is highlighting about Rukmini. She has this intense possessiveness of Lord Krishna, which is an aspect of prema that if one's meditating on the sweetness of Krishna, it's also part of it. So there's the one picture of lack of awareness of his powers, and then there's the other picture of having this possessiveness of Krishna. So Rukmini has that. That's what Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is explaining. And because of that a prema, that love of Krishna producing this possessiveness, it implies that the whole focus is on one object of love. So hence, everything else falls aside. And actually, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is highlighting that actually Rukmini doesn't have any affection for Rukmi. So, one might think, oh, is this heartless? Not at all, because we'll see how it actually plays itself out, what decision she makes and what decision Krishna makes. So functioning on such a transcendental level where affection is only for one object, namely Krishna, how it plays out where, there's some family member and the particular situation that's arisen in this particular case. So, continuing. There's an explanation for this exclusive possessiveness that happens in this heightened state of prema. When one is completely apathetic to all other objects and has developed an exclusive sense of ownership or possessiveness in relation to Lord Vishnu, thinking of Vishnu and no one else as one's object of love, such an awakening is called prema. So, what I was highlighting, it's the other picture of what happens with this sweetness of prema, or having that sweetness, seeing Krishna in that mood of sweetness and meditating on his sweet qualities, his sweet form, his sweet pastimes. There's possessiveness. He's the only object of such affection. So, if we return for a moment to the prema of the gopis, because if you recall in the beginning, there was a distinction made between the prema of the queens of Dwarka, so Rukmini, so I've gone a little bit into how prema itself works. There was mentioned that for the gopis, there's a different kind of prema in that there's not an awareness, or it's not dependent on public opinion, what other people will think. So, in Nectar of Devotion of Srila Prabhupada, the summary study, there's an explanation, and he's quoting also Srila Rupa Goswami in Padyavali. So Srila Prabhupada says that it's stated, when the gopis hear the sound of Krishna's flute, they immediately forget all rebukes offered by the elderly members of their families. They forget their defamation and the harsh behavior of their husbands. Their only thought is to go out in search of Lord Krishna. So that's that heightened prema, and how in the case of the gopis, so there's that sense of possessiveness of Krishna, there's the absorption in the sweetness of his form, and they have no concern that their names will be defamed. They have no concern that their husbands are going to treat them very harshly. They have no concern that the elderly members are going to rebuke them. They're going out at night in search of Krishna because of hearing the sound of his flute. So that's the prema in the form of, in how it takes shape in the gopis. Now, in terms of the prema of a queen of Dwarka, Rukmini in this case, there's an interesting explanation of how that prema plays out, together with an assessment of her relative Rukmi. So one can consider too that Queen Rukmini is acting in line. So I'm pulling back a little bit because you see the situation here is complex. Her brother's about to be killed. So it's a very telling moment. And she's operating on that level of prema. And so she's completely not viewing him with affection. So it doesn't mean that if one's in a state of prema, one doesn't view others as with affection, but in this particular case, she understands the nature of her brother, and she understands that all the various other kings are of a similar ilk, that there's this demoniac tendency. They're completely opposed to Krishna, and they certainly have no understanding of what it means, the connection with Krishna, this mood of love. So there's an interesting maxim of Chanakya Pandit that says, one should avoid at a distance a bad wife, a bad country, a bad ruler, a bad friend, and a bad relative. So it's actually quite in order to be distant from a bad relative. So Queen Rukmini is distant on two levels. She obviously understands perfectly her brother's character, and plus she's operating on that transcendental plane of prema for Lord Krishna. So there's an explanation for the particular lamentation, though, that becomes apparent, because it's said, she says to Krishna, "O controller of all mystic power, immeasurable one, Lord of lords, master of the universe, O all auspicious one and mighty armed one, please do not kill my brother." So just heard where she is, how she's operating, on what level she's operating, her understanding, but this is what is coming from her. So she's actually saying, do not kill my brother. And so it's a kind of lamentation, because she's operating on a transcendental level. So it's not just mundane, oh, it's wrong to kill my brother. I mean, she understands that he's of a very demoniac nature. So there's an explanation for, transcendental lamentation. And this is what it is. Absorption in sweetness is the cause of lamentation for Krishna, because of the presence in the devotee of bliss produced by realizing Krishna, who is composed of bliss, and because of this confidence, either by the nature of his particular prema or by assumption that ultimately there will be happiness, that lamentation produces a tendency towards happiness. So see how complex it is. She's in that state of prema. She's faced externally with this situation. Her close relative is about to be killed, her brother, by Krishna. And there's a kind of lamentation, because she's saying, please don't kill him. In fact, she even throws herself at Krishna's lotus feet and said, please don't kill him. But it's a transcendental lamentation. And the interesting thing is, and this is the explanation of functioning on that transcendental level of lamentation, that actually there's an ongoing bliss that's present while she's actually saying these words. And there's this bliss because she's very confident in her love of Krishna. And she knows that ultimately there's going to be happiness. So she performs her action. She's in the state of lamentation. And it's for Krishna. Remember, it's not concern for her brother exactly. It's because she's actually concerned how it's going to be viewed by the public. Her brother's going to be killed in front of her by her husband. So there's concern for, the ethical nature of such an act. But she's operating, because she's operating on a transcendental level, she's understanding that ultimately her kind of lamentation for Krishna of, what could possibly, how it's all going to play itself out, and if this action were to be performed, it would be, viewed not so favorably by the public. there's still that sense of happiness within, though she's lamenting that this possibility may be there. Now, this is a little difficult to infer because it's covered by the incidental experience of suffering. So this is the explanation that's given for lamentation. Like externally, it looks like suffering because, you read. Her throat choked up out of sorrow. So, it appears that externally, there's the underlying sense of suffering, it would appear, or there's an experience of suffering. So it's kind of difficult to describe, the level that she's operating on. But the explanation is that this is how it's put in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Even in Karuna Rasa, there is, Karuna meaning like merciful rasa, there's the underlying presence of happiness. So she's actually in a state of happiness while she's expressing this, and while this is externally appearing like this. So I tried to explain that as best I could. You understand it's complex. So bearing in mind this underlying presence of happiness, albeit the cause of lamentation being public opinion, on the killing of Rukmini before Rukmini's eyes, one can hear the appeal made by Rukmini to Krishna. So understanding that there's this appeal, but there's the underlying happiness, and there's that lamentation about what it's going to mean with public opinion about what's about to take place. So she addresses, and then here's the response. She addresses Krishna as Yogeshwar. And I'm drawing from Krishna book, the meaning of which is one who is possessed of inconceivable opulence and energy. And Srila Prabhupada explains this, that Rukmini compared the position of Rukmi with that of Krishna. So the very words she's using to praise Krishna, it's indirectly a comparison with Rukmi. And she very feelingly pleaded with her husband not to kill her brother. So Srila Prabhupada writes this. Krishna possesses inconceivable opulence and energy, whereas Rukmini's brother had only limited military presence. Krishna is immeasurable, whereas her brother was measured every step of his life. I mean, at any moment, death is approaching for him. Therefore, Rukmi was not comparable to even an insignificant insect before the incomparable power of Lord Krishna. She also addressed Krishna as the god of the gods. So there are many powerful demigods, such as Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Lord Indra, Lord Varuna, but Krishna is the Lord of all these gods. Whereas Rukmini's brother was not only an ordinary living being, human being, but in fact the lowest of all human beings because he had no understanding of Krishna. So in other words, a human being who has no understanding of the actual position of Krishna is the lowest in human society. So then Rukmini addresses Krishna as Jagatpati, the master of the whole cosmic manifestation. And in comparison, her brother was only an ordinary prince. So, and Srila Vishwanath, he writes in a similar way. Of course, he's written before Srila Prabhupada, but he spells out the implications of this comparison that Rukmini is making. And he spells it out this way. You, so Rukmini talking to Krishna, you possess inconceivable great transcendental opulences, while Rukmi is the most insignificant of those who are controlled by you. So, he's spelling out the implications. part of the opulence of Krishna is, his lordship, his control of everyone. So the implication is that of those that he's controlling, Rukmi is extremely insignificant. You are the immeasurable one, and he's like an insect among the limited. So, once he's limited in terms of the bodily form he's occupying, in terms of the amount of power he has coming from that form, whereas in Krishna's case, he's immeasurable, unlimited power. He's the master of all mystic powers. And Rukmini carries on, and this is Srila Vishwanath drawing out the implications. You are supreme among the demigods, and he is the lowest among humans because he is inimical to you. So there's that qualification. Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti is drawing out the implications. You are the protector of the universe, and though he is evil, because he is within the universe, he is to be protected. So notice she's completely consistent. And Srila Vishwanath is drawing out the implications. And here's the conclusion. Just because although he's evil, because Krishna is the protector of the universe, and Rukmi happens to be in the universe, he's to be protected. That's her argument. Therefore, O auspicious one with mighty arms, Maha Bhuja is the Sanskrit, you should not kill this inauspicious person with no power in his arms. So it's very interesting, isn't it, how the particular thinking goes. And finally, again, acceding to worldly rule, which is what the particular concern is of the queens of Dwarka, and Queen Rukmini falls in that category, is that, and this was brought up, I think here, yes, this was the BBT purport, that according to worldly rule, one's sister is the personification of mercy. So Rukmini was compassionate towards Rukmi. And even though Rukmi was wicked and opposed to her and would have been the cause of her having to give up her life if she'd been forced to marry Shishupal, she still has compassion for Rukmi. And Krishna shares her compassion. So in effect, Rukmini, in her expression of love for Krishna, was experiencing lamentation. And this lamentation is defined as finding oneself in reversed conditions. So in fear of her brother being killed, her limbs tremble, her mouth dries up, her throat chokes up in sorrow. And hence, in this condition, she had become thoughtful. And hence she makes that comparison between Rukmi and Krishna. So this is actually the explanation that's given for being in that state of lamentation, showing these symptoms, but it also is part of, because it's on a transcendental level, there's thoughtfulness that accompanies the lamentation. And hence we hear of her making that comparison between Krishna and Rukmi. And there's also regretfulness and heavy breathing. That's the definition that's given for somebody being in a state of lamentation. So reverse condition in life and showing some emotions, such as regretfulness, heavy breathing. And we hear some of that with Rukmini in this condition. Because these are the symptoms that are listed in Nectar of Devotion for somebody in a state of lamentation or transcendental lamentation. So Rukmini and Krishna, they both share compassion for Rukmini, because for them, they're considering what's just punishment in the circumstance. And because after all, they're rulers of the kingdom of Dwarka. I mean, it's Queen Rukmini now, and Krishna is king of Dwarka. So naturally, they have to actually consider punishment, but it has to be just, because there's the obligation to the citizens. So this is a particular protocol for persons that are in the position of rulership in the royal order. Just punishment pleases everyone. Unjust or inauspicious or inappropriate punishment produces wrath. Where retribution is discriminately applied, people live peacefully. So that's a particular protocol that needs to be adhered to by rulers. There has to be appropriate punishment. Otherwise, actually, people are going to feel wrathful. So it's very important. And so even though there's compassion on the part of Lord Krishna, he still wants to give Rukmini some light punishment. So this is the just punishment. So he's heard Rukmini's appeal. He's understood. She's actually reached her conclusion. Krishna should give him protection. Krishna shares her compassion. He understands. But he still has to administer some punishment, because punishment is called for in terms of his behavior. So he wants to give light punishment. So we're going to hear that light punishment, but it takes the form of tying up Rukmini with a piece of cloth and snipping at his moustache, his beard, and his hair. So I presume Krishna's doing it with a sword. I'm sure he didn't bring out, his cosmetic shears for Rukmini's beard and moustache. Because after all, it was a very trying circumstance. So this is a light punishment that is going to be meted out to Rukmini. So on the transcendental level, one may remember Srila Rupa Goswami, and I alluded to it earlier, that he's saying in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, though lamentation appears and becomes intense, it also spreads a condition of undetected happiness, which is difficult to describe. So both Krishna and Rukmini are operating in the state of happiness, in coming to their conclusion. In Rukmini going through her lamentation, there's actually happiness. So Queen Rukmini was in fact discharging her duty faithfully, depending on Krishna. Because that's the nature of the relationship. That's what's allowing for that ongoing happiness, even in that trying moment of having to make a decision of what's the just punishment for Rukmini. And, one can recall Bhagavad Gita 1858, where Krishna says, in all activities depend upon me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. And that's Rukmini in a very heightened state of love for Krishna, certainly depending on him, certainly working under his protection, and certainly being fully conscious of Krishna. So I guess I can bring it to a close there. These were some thoughts on trying to paint the whole picture of where Rukmini is in her thinking and her functioning in this very trying moment. So if there's any thoughts on this subject matter or some contribution or even a query.
Hare Krishna Mata, thank you so much for such nice vivid description. You did mention that Queen Rukmini was feeling transcendental lamentation, and there was some anticipation of bliss. She was already in bliss. Difficult. Well, maybe that is the definition of transcendental nature. But if you can talk more about the subject, I don't. Is there? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also says simultaneously one and different. Is there? I find it difficult to find correlation when these transcendental subject matter been discussed. Can you
Well,
talk about that more?
I think I covered it very thoroughly in the class. Um, it's not that, I'm privy to that state of, transcendental realization or transcendental emotion. It's a very advanced stage of Krishna consciousness, to be in the topmost stage of love for Krishna, where he's the only object of affection. It's it's not that I'm privy to that, but I'm giving the understanding of Srila Vishwanath, Srila Rupa Goswami, Srila Prabhupada. And clearly the very strong faith that's there in Krishna, in that loving relationship, is what allows for a person in a very important position in society like Queen Rukmini. It means that so many citizens' lives are going to be affected by whatever example the royal order sets. So whatever example she sets, Krishna sets, is going to affect all the citizens. So in that very in the spotlight position, the particular actions that are taken have to be on an ethical level correct, and on a transcendental level completely in order. So I've tried to highlight the ethical quandary and at the same time the internal state of Rukmini in that loving relationship with Krishna. So I think if anything, it should be very apparent that in that advanced stage of love for Krishna, one's thinking power is very clear, very sharp, and the intelligence is operating perfectly. Because though she is in a state of newfound responsibility, in one sense one could say. She's become the Queen of Dwarka now. She's officially betrothed to Krishna just by virtue of the fact that he went through the Rakshasa style of marriage. And she's already operating, I mean, she's a princess already, but she's already operating, having that perfect cognitive functioning that accompanies her very advanced stage of prema for Krishna. So that's one thing that emerged for me personally, understanding that the intelligence is operating tremendously well. So everything is beautifully balanced. Her responsibility to her brother, her responsibility to Krishna, and her responsibility to the citizens.
So my question is also similar to the transcendental aspect. But you were mentioning how to, well, no, you weren't mentioning. Okay, you were mentioning about like love of, Krishna, of Vishnu. And my question is like, how do we develop, like having that total affection for Vishnu, how do we develop that when, like, being here within the what am I trying to say? Sorry, give me 1 second.
Keep the microphone close. So your question is, how does one come to develop that sense of possessiveness of Lord Vishnu? No?
No.
I didn't hear properly. Keep the microphone.
Yeah, because I'm trying to process how to ask my question. More so, like, okay, like within this material world, we have relationships with devotees. And in the midst of that relationship, like, that's also a part of our developing that affection for Krishna as well. But when the two don't, like, coincide so well, when we want to have complete affection for Krishna, but then that affection doesn't necessarily manifest so well with the devotees, and how do we completely keep ourselves absorbed in that affection of Vishnu?
Oh, that's interesting. So the question was, how does one keep one's affection just for Lord Vishnu or Lord Krishna if one's actually also, through the course of one's devotional life, developing relationships that are affectionate towards other devotees? No, I still didn't get the question. That was it.
Don't coincide, like you want to develop that affection for Vishnu, but the affection with the devotees may not be so easily attainable, and so the two seem to go hand in hand. So if you're trying to develop that complete love and affection for Vishnu, but you don't have that complete love and affection for his devotees, then does that block you from being able to develop that? How do you reconcile that difference?
Okay, so that one may be on that path of developing exclusive affection for Lord Vishnu or Krishna, but finding that it's not so, it's not quite the same thing, developing the affection for his devotees. Yeah. Well, there's the activities that one performs in one's life that are selfless service to Lord Krishna, because always one is putting aside one's material interests in order to be able to perform a devotional act. So it's been very selfless, and that selflessness is an expression of that wanting to move on the path of coming to view Krishna exclusively as one's object of affection. And then there's the reality that in one's daily life, one's coming into contact with other devotees, maybe even materialistic persons, and one's having it sort of graphically visible that it's not so easy to be affectionate or feel affection or even some sort of transcendental positive emotion towards other devotees, or to speak of materialistic persons. Well, this is the interesting part. There's always the the intelligence has to operate where one is consciously aware of one's mind working in a particular way. So one's trying to develop transcendental intelligence, which is part of, getting knowledge of Krishna, getting knowledge of how a devotional life works. So one uses that knowledge that one has got to help one's mind as one's sort of negotiating one's dealings with other devotees or materialistic persons. So one is naturally, because one's mind has lots of patterns that have been learned through one's dealings in material life and on a material level. I mean, you learn patterns. I mean, a child gets smacked on the hand if they, run too close to the door all on their own, as opposed to, looking back to see if their parent is with them or something. So they learn, I can't actually run a long distance without checking with my parent if it's okay that I'm running. So that's a simple graphic example, but a pattern gets set up that I need to refer to my parent if I'm going to perform some sort of spontaneous act. It's better that I refer to my parent. So some learning happens. So in one's own mind, one has developed different kinds of patterns. Like in one's upbringing, there's constantly persons that have patterns of their own. They transmit those patterns to their children. So one's already got lots of patterns. And it's the patterns in the mind that interfere in the relationships with other devotees. So in order to, smooth that out or have like an overlap with, one's selfless devotional acts towards Krishna, one needs to apply the intelligence that one has, the knowledge one has of spiritual life and the process of Krishna consciousness to how one's mind is dictating. So the mind may dictate, I'll try and think of a personal example. I may feel very unhappy if somebody ignores me. Because in my mind, there may be a pattern that, through the upbringing, one parent was, not so conscious of being affectionate. So I have that already. So therefore, when ignored, it will trigger in me an upset feeling. So I use my intelligence and say, oh, there's that pattern in the mind again. What does it matter? I do not know the internal state of this other person. The other person may not have seen me. The other person may be hurrying to some destination and they've got no time to look left or right. I do not know the other person's reality, but let me attend to my own reality. I need to remind myself that actually it's I'm in the present. I'm not that child that's been ignored. I'm an adult person. It's perfectly fine. The whole world can go about their business. I'll just comfort that inner child that needs a little bit of affection that maybe didn't get at some point. And then it's not anymore about the other devotee. It's about oneself and dealing with whatever one's own patterns are. So always that responsibility is with oneself. And that's the way that it will allow for much nicer, happier relationships with others because you're attending to what you need to attend to within yourself. It's not about the external world. So again, there are different levels of responsibility. When the responsibility is higher, in terms of the duties one has to perform externally, it becomes more pressing that one's mind doesn't come into the picture. It becomes much more pressing. So one keeps practicing, always going internally and examining what is one's own mental pattern and then applying intelligence to help the mind. So it doesn't actually become the way that one is operating externally. You don't want the mind to be the driving the whole chariot and causing destruction and devastation. You want the intelligence to operate so everything is controlled and in order. And I mean, here this particular scenario of Rukmini is such a brilliant illustration of somebody actually utilizing intelligence to manage a very difficult situation. So that's the key for maybe not, it takes time to develop spiritual love for others. It takes a long time, but just acting correctly moves in the right direction. Because then you're always respectful to everyone. And that's part of also just seeing how Rukmini is functioning. She actually knows that her brother is working completely against her. But that's not her focus. Her focus is, He's a citizen of the universe. Krishna's the protector of the whole universe. He should be protected. I mean, that is proper intelligence. It's not, I dislike this fellow. He was about to ruin my life. Go ahead and kill him. Not at all. It's like utilizing the intelligence. So you use the intelligence always to perform the correct actions, and just continuously performing the correct actions leads to the right, spiritual emotion that can extend to others, like caring or compassion. So, yeah. Thank you very much for your very kind attention. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Srimad Bhagavatam.